right, so awesome to see everybody coming online. Wow, you all look amazing and beautiful. Welcome, welcome.
We're just going to give it about 5 minutes, everyone. So if you'll just bear with us and check out these kind of agreements and tech issues on the screen we're sharing. We're super excited to be here with all of y'all.
Okay, I think we'll get started now. So thank you all for being here. I want to welcome everyone into our space and welcome to the first Remembering Forward Just Transition webinar series. I'm really happy to see all of you. I scrolled through a bit and I see some familiar faces, see some smiling faces. So good to see all of you. We really appreciate you being here. And I want to say happy Earth Day. For some of us, it's Earth Day every day, but we're happy to celebrate Earth Day together. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on and say Masit Cho to the land that we're standing on. So let's just take a moment and ground ourselves, place your feet on the ground and feel that land underneath where you're at. You're probably in a house, but imagine that your feet is on that land and think about your relationship to that land and what brought you there, and acknowledge the indigenous people of that land, because no matter where you are, you're on indigenous homelands. Where I'm at here in Anchorage, it's the homeland of the Dena'ina. And whether you're in Fairbanks, you're on the homeland of the Dena people. So no matter where you're at, it's really good practice to have that understanding and to have that grounding and that respect, and to give thanks to the original stewards of the land and to move forward with that. So just wanted to say thank you to our land that has always been here for us, and it will always be there for us in the future, and to the medicine and to the life that it gives us all. So with that, I'll just do a short introduction of myself. Shojrit Rochelle Adams Oji, Wichaje Tendugwatanisi, Shiahanai Angela Peters, Cliff Adams, Govojrit Gashitit Vakwa, Gasha Vet Ethan. Juk Anchorage Gwich E, Shigi Nai Amea Kosots Ashe Dahan Govojrit. Native Peoples Action Community Fund and Jit Shuguchutukos in Indigenous Engagement Coordinator EC. So Jukdrin Shidri Shroncha. My name is Rochelle Adams. I was raised in the villages of Beaver and Fort Yukon, which in Athabascan. I live here now in Anchorage. I said who my family is. Maybe I have some cousins on here, and who my children are, and that I work for Native Peoples Action Community Fund as the Indigenous Engagement Coordinator. And today my heart is really happy to welcome all of you here and to be here with you. And it's just, it's a real honor to work amongst these people, and so, and to do this good work. So with that, we'll move forward and in our grounding and with our love and respect for the land that we're on. So Masit Cho to all of you. And don't forget in the chat, you have an option to state your name, your pronouns. I use she and her, and say where you're from and your tribe if you want to. So Masit Cho, and we'll move it over to Jessica.
Now you can probably hear me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jessica Gerard. I am up here on the lower Tana Dene Peoples lands in Fairbanks. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns, and I am the director of the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition, and super excited to have you all in this space today. I see some faces from the Just Transition Summit and some faces from all over the state and out of state, so super excited that y'all are here with us today. And if anybody hasn't introduced themselves in the chat, please do that. And also, if you were at the summit and you want to just say hi and remind us, it would be really great to see who was at the summit, because we are doing this webinar as an extension of that summit to bring in more people that weren't able to attend with us in January in Fairbanks, but also to reinvigorate that community we built together and reconnect to build out a larger network for just transition. across the state, and to connect with our partners in the lower 48 and across the globe that are doing work around just transition. So with all of that, I just wanted to say that we are super glad to have you here, and that this first webinar is really a focus on reorienting all of us within the Just Transition framework itself. So we'll be talking about the economies that we're in now, the economies we want to go towards, and how we get there collectively in a good way. So that's what we're going to focus on today. But then the following three webinars, which we hope you all will join us for, will focus on really the moment that is happening right now with the coronavirus and other crises that we're facing, and how that connects to a notion of just recovery, and how we can be collectively working for change within the context of crises. So that's our goals and our kind of flow for the next couple of webinars. We're super pumped to share this time with you, as we mentioned. And I'm going to pass it over to Ine to really ground us in this moment. Thanks again for being here.
Yat edo hehe masicho Ine bge dash janet kaji ni nishlan do ojine bashishchin do ashen dashanella agdadnes and nishlan ado shoji Ine Peter Oji Navajo and Thana Octum, and I'm married into Gwich'en Nation here in Alaska. And I am the executive director of Native Movement. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. And I am calling in, or I'm zooming in from the lands of the Dene peoples of the Lower Tanana. So really honored and thankful to be here on the lands of my relatives, Dene peoples, also of the North, and thankful for their stewardship from past to present and into the future. So welcome. I'm so excited to see all the faces on this Zoom. And what we're talking about today is just transition. So there's many different definitions of just transition. It's not a stringent rule of how we move forward, but it's really a guidance. In my mind, is a framework for building shared language together that really helps to bring coalitions and partnerships into alignment. And I have been doing various work for many years around just transition. So I'm so thrilled that we're carrying this work forward in Alaska and growing our just transition network. And it's really exciting. So this, you can see on your screen a slide of one definition of just transition. And this definition comes from movement generation. And essentially, right, is this just transition is a framework for a fair shift to an economy that is ecologically sustainable, equitable, and just for all. We really like what Movement Generation has put out in their materials. Something that they say often is transition is inevitable, right? Whether that's climate change, whether that's a collapsing oil economy, we're in the moment of transition right now. And I think we're all feeling how change feels. And I hope folks have been taking a moment and taking care of themselves in this moment of crisis, of transition, where we are sitting in so much uncertainty, whether that's uncertainty about the school system, our economic system, our health. I know that it's been a wild few weeks, and we have really been sitting with how do we move forward in this time when there's so much uncertainty. And I think the Just Transition framework is a pathway that helps lead us through this time, right? In this understanding that transition is inevitable, but justice is not. And so it is the responsibility of each of us to move justice and equity, move on a path of justice and equity as we're moving through transition. So this is a timely time to be really steeping ourselves in just transition. But really quickly, I want to touch base also on what the history of just transition is, because this just transition language and a strategy has been around for some time. And so I just want to make sure that we kind of have a bit of that before we move into what that means for Alaska. So the just transition strategy was a strategy created by unions, labor unions, and communities of color and environmental justice work in the 90s, in the late 80s. And so this was communities that were frontline communities, fence line communities, communities that depended on extractive industries or industries that were also polluting them, but they're depending on them for jobs, right? So folks have some understanding of environmental racism and that history of how environmental racism has really targeted communities of color and low-income communities for extractive industries. And so it really has really set up communities to be exploited labor force, but also getting the brunt of all the health impacts, right? And so just transition strategy came out of this late 80s, early 90s time. A number of organizations that you can see on your screen have been a part of developing out just transition strategies that were really about how do we work collectively as labor unions, as environmental justice organizations, as community members, and as maybe conservation organizations to transition, not just end these polluting things immediately, because we know that people's livelihoods are attached to these things. And we have to build in justice and equity within any transition. How do we do that in a way that does put the people that have been most exploited, the most oppressed by these industries into the leadership of developing out what the plan is moving forward? And so that's been a big part of the just transition history, and really, and now you can see on your screen, thank you, some words from other just transition leaders in the country. For Jahan Giron here, just transition means we are intentional about ending the fossil fuel economy, so it builds up an alternative economy that benefits our people, right? Other folks in the just transition work around the country, like Asian Pacific, I think this next slide, Asian Pacific Environmental Network said just transition looks like community power. We own, control, and make decisions about our energy economy to benefit everyone in our community. So really this combination of community power, people power, and shifting from extractive economies to economies that benefit more folks, right? And so this was a specific strategy for numerous environmental justice communities work, and it's grown in the past years into a larger framework that we're going to go into next. So I want to invite Polly is going to talk more. Polly Carr from the Alaska Center.
Thank you so much, Ine, and hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Polly Carr. I use she, her pronouns. I live on Dena'ina lands near the Eklutna tribe, as other people somewhat know as Anchorage. But my family is originally from the Lenape lands in Connecticut. I'm executive director of the Alaska Center, and I'm raising a 9-year-old daughter, and she's in my heart as we do this work. And right now she's on my mind because she's in the other room and I have no idea what she's doing. As we think about a just transition, we first need to understand the systems that we're living in and the relationships that inform our economy. And so if you're looking at this slide, want to reorient ourselves to some basic terms. And the base of all three of these terms is eco, which translates to folks as habitat or environment, but really that's home. And so ecosystem, that's the people, the animals, the plants, the lands, and the waters, not just the category of those things, but the relationships between them. And an ecosystem can be small or large, depending on where you draw the boundaries of home. Ecology is the prolonged and thoughtful knowledge of the living world around us that we gain and the consequences of our actions upon it. Ecological justice is the state of balance between human communities and healthy ecosystems based on thriving, mutually beneficial relationships. And as we look at those terms, I think it's interesting right now to think about how they have changed in the current moment. You know, boundaries of home are certainly shifting as we are all at home or quarantining. Additionally, our knowledge of home is shifting. You know, we are seeing animals shift their patterns. People are hearing bird song for the first time in some places. There's fewer emissions. And I think that the state of imbalance that we have between communities and ecosystems has been illuminated in this current moment with the coronavirus pandemic. Now I want to go to the next E, which is economy. And this is an interesting term. You know, I think that, I don't know about you, but I grew up being taught that economy was an exclusive word, you know, and that only economists or marketplace experts could understand. But I think that we are all able and qualified to talk about our home. And so thinking of economy as how we manage what is valuable to us, you know, how we take care of our home is incredibly empowering, and I think can open us up to creative, innovative, and compassionate ways to live. And so I want to prompt this question for everybody and invite you to provide your thoughts in the chat box, which is, you know, what are we taught are the current indicators of a strong economy? And what do those indicators maybe miss? And so we're going to see what's coming in through the chat box there. They're saying Wall Street, the stock market, GDP again, right? Unemployment, ownership. So a lot around like paying jobs, GDP, and of course, price of oil. Price of oil came in by two people right after each other. Natural resources, PFD, right? Bring it home right here in Alaska. And it keeps going. I'm seeing profit margins, et cetera. And so what we're also hearing from folks about what some of those things are missing is equity and maybe the non-cash economy elements that actually make up the things that we value in our home. Perpetual economic growth. I'm gonna end there with the feedback that we've been getting, but people have been sort of all speaking to some of the common things that we've been taught about what our economy is and how it's valued. I'm going to turn it to Very, who's going to speak a little bit more about opening that up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Very DeSuvero. Actually, could you go back to the previous slide? This isn't part of my normal introduction, but I studied linguistics. And when I first saw the breakdown of eco and nomi, of home and management, my mind was totally blown. And so as part of my introduction, I should say I live on Dena'ina lands right now, and I'm from Lenape lands. And that that understanding and that introduction is so critical when we think about economy, right? In this broken down term, in the management of home, who has managed these homelands for tens of thousands of years? And when I do my introduction, I'm able to come back to that. And through the work that I do, which is really focused on economies and consumers and what are we doing as part of economy of care, right? And other types of economies that I'll go into in a second. It's really important to remember what these words actually mean. And so just to finish my introduction, my pronouns are they, them. I'm really excited to see all your faces today. And the GDP that you all, or a lot of you put into this chat, I think it, to me, is like the best example of something that has absolutely no day-to-day relevance to my life. A GDP does not tell me, is not an indicator of my financial status or of my well-being and my health or of my community's health. It doesn't tell me whether or not my community is failing or not. There are a lot of other indicators of that we'll get into a second under our current system of capitalism. But the GDP, I think, is a particularly poignant example of how our economy and how our home is managed in a way that benefits some of us, but not all of us. And so I want to now pass it actually back to Polly to look at what economy looks like and what how we can understand what an economy involves, including the pillars of an economy.
Thanks, Very. So you have this slide in front of you. And so to break it down, you know, resources plus work equals the purpose of an economy. And so like what those resources are, how we view them, how we utilize them, how we apply work to achieve that purpose makes up our economy. But underpinning that are two important things. And so at the top here, you see worldview, and I would say that's worldview or culture. And that is what makes any economy make sense to the people who participate in it. It sets the limits of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And it evolves in relationship with these other pillars that you see on the screen. Things like languages, stories, practices, and rituals all transfer culture. Governance, which you see at the bottom, that is the organization and facilitation of a smooth functioning of the economy toward its purpose. And form follows function, so the form of governance is determined by the purpose of the economy. And this looks different at different scales and for different parts of the economy. Both governance and culture worldview weave together in service to the purpose of any given economy. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to hand it to Very, and we're going to be looking at a current extractive economy.
Thanks, Polly. I find that this is a really incredible model, and we're going to be using it going forward to look at all the different dynamics at play. And in an extractive economy, you might all recognize this as a truth that you see, maybe not in your own communities, but in a larger economy that's given a lot of power in our world right now. And so starting with purpose, the purpose of an extractive economy is the enclosure of wealth and power to the absolute exclusion of everything else. And so when that concentration of wealth happens, there is so much that is perpetuated as these systems evolve and become more refined. And so regardless of intention, some effects of that are slavery and genocide, colonization, and especially that relates to work, that second part, the work, and then the resources, natural resources end up in the erosion of the biological and cultural diversity that we all depend on. And that leads us to the purpose, right? Which is the enclosure of wealth and power. And so if you would be willing to share in the chat box how you're seeing this play out right now in our current situation in COVID. I'll just share one example. So I should have said I'm the executive director of AKPERG. We're a consumer organization, and the stimulus checks that everyone is receiving, they are being immediately garnished by debt collectors and payday lenders and banks for people who owe money. And so that money, which is meant to go to help feed people and help provide a necessary immediate relief, is being taken by debt collectors, and there are not structures stopping them. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, this philosophy of enclosure of wealth and this right to people's wealth is the purpose, right, of an extractive economy. And that's sort of held together through a worldview. And that worldview, I simply say capitalism, but that includes a lot of different things. It includes a lot of the myths that we hear of pulling people up by their bootstraps. It involves radical individualism, where it's our fault if we aren't making the same type of money that others are. It's our fault for a lot of trauma that we've all processed. And so white supremacy contributes into that radical individualism and ultimately capitalism, as does the heteropatriarchy. And I would love to continue this conversation in the chat and could talk about it all day. But I think it briefly encapsulate a worldview that helps drive, or that helps inform the purpose. And the governance systems, right now are an extractive economy around the world. That's militarism, and it's, Dewey, the laissez-faire capitalism. It's this belief in like this invisible hand, right? But the invisible hand is able to hide what it perpetrates and perpetuates as well. And so the governance system of militarism is structural, well-organized, and systematic violence in order to exploit goods. And again, enclose wealth and purpose. Do you all recognize that? Do you see that happening in our current society right now? I feel like I see that normally, and it's not new, but I see it more so right now than ever. And so I think everyone, if you could take a deep breath, that was a lot, it was heavy. And I'm gonna turn it back to Polly to talk through a new way or different ways forward. And Polly, you're on mute.
Thank you, Very, and thanks for going through that. It is a lot to digest, but I think that at the core of just transition is like undoing a lot of these narratives that we're told, including things like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and this current extractive economy, this dominant extractive economy, because we know there are other economies out there. That's where we are, but that's not where we want to be. At least that's not where I want to be. And so to focus on where we want to be and how we get there, we first need to get rerouted in our values. And so I'm going to hand it to Rochelle and Kengo next, who are going to talk with you about that.
Yeah, thanks, Polly. Yeah, so we just heard from Polly and Very, Masicho. That was amazing. So take a deep breath, talking about, this imbalanced, extractive, dominant economy. So how do we get from there to where we want to be towards a equitable, sustainable, regenerative economy that is balanced? So, well, we do this by having a strong foundation and being grounded in our connection to the lands and waters, which is exactly what Indigenous people have been doing since time immemorial. So we have lived on our ancestral homes and lived in balance with a deep respect and obligation to protect those lands that we live with, such as our animals, fish, birds, plants, in our waters and our lands. So because we know that water is life and our land has always been there for us and it always will be if we take care of it. So this is the knowledge and the strength that we need to build from, which also means moving away from oppressive structures that Veri and Polly were mentioning, that marginalize this knowledge base and these people, our people. So this core concept of remembering forward is rooted in traditional values and our traditional ways of life, and that knowledge that has been passed down from generations on how to live in balance with the lands and waters. So it's not something new to Alaska, but it needs to be remembered and understood and uplifted so that when we're rebuilding our Alaska that we want to see and we move forward towards equity and sustainability, it's built on our values of community, because we all have a strength, we all have a role. It's built on our value of family. No one is left behind, and all of us working towards a common good to keep our homeland safe and our waters clean enough to drink from. So, as Indigenous people have always done for thousands of years, and it's done with love and respect. So with that, just remember to always acknowledge the land that you're on, and that's the first step. So Masicho, and now I want to hand it over to Kango to talk about some of our key principles and how we do this work.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now? Cool. Thank you, Rochelle, for that. My name is Kengo Nagaoka. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm calling in from Dena Ina land today. I'm here representing the Alaska Center and also Fire Week Collective. We are a statewide network of young Alaskans who are organizing for a just and sustainable future. Thank you, Rochelle, for kicking us off into our values. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the principles that are guiding us through this work. I want to remind you all of something that Ine said in the beginning, which was transition is inevitable, but justice is not. And so to ensure justice in this transition, we have to have really strong principles that we're holding ourselves accountable to. And some of these principles I'll be introducing you to are from Just Transition Alliance and Indigenous Environmental Network. So first of all, I think that we can probably agree that we have a fundamental human right to clean air, water, land, and food in our workplaces, homes, and environment. We also believe that we can simultaneously create sustainable development, have a healthy economy, and maintain a clean and safe environment. I think a lot of people who defend the extractive economy tend to talk about a binary between like having a prosperous future and having a clean environment and climate action. We think that's a false binary. We think it's possible to create a prosperous future and also protect our ways of living, our environment, and Mother Earth. The solutions that we're calling for also require local, regional, national, and global solidarity. And so what this means to me is we can't be doing this in a vacuum. Even if our state or a community is doing all the things in the just transition, unless the globe moves forward as a whole, these solutions are not going to be possible. And so we need to be working with each other across barriers and boundaries to move forward in a global movement for just transition. We also must include both frontline workers and fence line communities most affected by pollution, ecological damage, and economic restructuring. And I would actually say one step forward that these people must be involved in the planning and be involved from the start for this. Just transition cannot be a plan that's dreamed up by like professors and politicians and then implemented. This is not how real change works, and we know this, and so we're talking about change from the ground up. And next slide, please. Also, the cost of this transition should not be borne by current or future victims of environmental and economic injustices. When I see this, I really start thinking about communities like Shishmaref and Kivalina, who are having to really fight their own way into moving their villages because of erosion from climate change. These communities that are most affected by climate injustice should not be the ones bearing the cost of this. We need to ensure justice for these communities. And yep. Also, the workers and community residents have a right to challenge any entity that commits economic and or environmental justices. And this is really about us having a voice over what happens in our homes. This makes me really think about the people who are fighting in Bristol Bay right now against Pebble Mine, and up in the North Slope against more irresponsible oil and gas development. And next. These are just a few from the Indigenous Environmental Network. I think Rochelle spoke to this beautifully, but this is really about restoring Indigenous life ways of responsibility, duty, and respect to Mother Earth. A lot of these ways of living, we don't have to recreate. It's about reaffirming and restoring these. We also need to recognize that Indigenous knowledge should be guiding the way as we're developing all of this. We need to reject market-based mechanisms that allow the quantification and commodification of Mother Earth's natural resources and processes. And we also need to recognize Indigenous right to food sovereignty in Indigenous lands and territories. So I just want you to take a moment to reflect on these principles, if they're sitting right with you, if these are reflected in your community already. But I'm going to pass it on to Jessica and Ine to talk about what a regenerative economy can look like.
Thanks, Kengo. So we talked about where we are. We know that that is not great for most people. For a small percentage of people, it's a really great system, but that is not working for everybody and has never worked for everybody. So what we're trying to do with this just transition community and framework is build a collective message, as Ine was mentioning, and really come together and recognize the value that each of us hold while we are in work, not in work, in the movement, not in the movement, disabled, abled, queer or straight, that we all come together in this towards a shared purpose. And that shared purpose can no longer be the wealth and accumulation for a small amount of people. It must therefore be restorative, and it must be restorative toward ecological and social well-being. This is a restoration of the relationship with each other and a restoration with our relationship to the lands, the waters, and the air. So the purpose would then be transitioning from a purpose of accumulation for really rich folks on the backs of other folks to an accumulation of shared value between humans, plant families, etc. Which means we need to build a relationship with how we do our work. And we've been seeing this, right? The economy did not stop with when coronavirus happened. The economy that stopped was the accumulation of wealth for a certain amount of people. The economy that stopped was the extractive economy. The economy that is stopped right now is so many other things that do not apply to our communities. Our communities are cared for right now. Yes, they're not all cared for. And yes, we're doing this in the best way that we can from communities. And the thing with regenerative economy that is really key to talk about when we talk about any sort of transition is the scale in which we do it. And we are seeing that from villages making decisions about who can and cannot come into their communities right now, to Anchorage developing mutual aid platforms at a scale throughout the city. So regenerative economies are really about scale, and the purpose is no longer about one entity gaining wealth. So how do we do that? The labor that Veri and Polly talked about in this framework work has to be about cooperation. It is a transition from separating our values and our labor and transitioning that back together. transitioning from an extractive labor source of taking things from the ground, such as oil and gas, or being overfishing rivers and oceans. It is finding a balance with what we need and the contradiction as humans. We need things, right? We need to eat, we need to drink water, we need to breathe air, we need trees to heat our homes. But that relationship needs to be more balanced. And so work is more about cooperation. It is about workers and owners being in cooperation. If anybody has been listening to any of the amazing webinars that Naomi Klein has been on, she has talked about as all these small businesses may collapse under the stress of the pandemic we're under. But instead of bankrupting those businesses, why isn't the first option that workers of those businesses become cooperative owners? And that's what labor looks like, right? Is when we cooperatively own things and that there's not a hierarchy of who gets what. So that's one example. Another labor that could be back to restoration is dismantling pipelines and cleaning our rivers and taking down dams and letting those fish come back home. There's a lot of labor that can come to get us to the purpose of ecological and social well-being. And we'll try to share some examples in Alaska in a bit and then have some breakout groups which talk about this together. So we're going through this pretty quickly, but I just want to remind folks that we will be having a conversation together. So in this framework, if we have a purpose that is ecologically and socially well-being as the purpose, and we get there by mutual cooperation, what are the resources? The resources are still pretty much the same. Yes, we might need oil and gas for a while longer. That's why this is called a transition. Yes, we need things as humans to survive, but we can do it regeneratively, right? We can take the fish that we need and not have an abundance. We can take the toilet paper that we need and not have an abundance, right? We can take the trees that we need in a good way and make sure that old growth forests are growing back. There are ways to do this. And the reason that these are not implemented is because the current purpose of our economy is to make some people money. And as Kengo mentioned, right, the story is that if we have to either take down trees or everyone's going to be cold, right? Or we need to develop coal or everyone's going to be poor. And these are binaries that do not work in the current real world scenarios of the climate crisis, of colonialism, etc. So if we do all of those things, right, we still need a worldview, a culture that we can all agree on that isn't so dominant and oppressive. White supremacy, oppressive, patriarchy, oppressive, right? That doesn't work for me. And Ine is going to talk after this a little bit about a different kind of regenerative economy. But in this particular framework, we talk about caring and sacredness. And I think we have seen this a ton in our mutual aid work, right? We see that people are caring for each other by staying at home, caring for each other by making masks and bringing things to their elders and doing errands. That is caring. And we need to do that, as I mentioned earlier, at a scale, right? So we do that in our families, I hope. We do that in our communities. And then we need to do it at different scales. And we need policies and platforms at levels that support that scale. And that's where we get to deep democracy. And deep democracy means that we need to bring the power down. Lisa Murkowski should not be making decisions for the community of Bristol Bay. Lisa Murkowski should not be making decisions for the people that live off the Yukon, right? We talk about the notion of boundaries instead of borders, and the boundaries that are natural are the scale in which we need to have our democracy. So a river system, a watershed is our boundary. And the boundary is not what people want. It is the things that we need and we need to survive with. We need to survive with clean air, we need water, and we need homes. And Jahan, who Ine referenced earlier in this slide, said to me, one time when we were talking, she said, just transition work is really about knowing where your water is and how you get your food. And if you don't know that, then you're not doing just transition work. So the democracy is about small, everything else is about caring, and we got to do it with a purpose. And so that's just one Western way of thinking about it. And to indigenize it and throw some sparkle in there, I'm going to hand it to Ine Begay about indigenous economies.
Sparkle, here I come. Thanks, Jess. Yeah, so we're not necessarily, what was just presented in terms of a regenerative economy might seem idealistic to some folks, right? And we really hope to press upon folks when we talk about remembering forward. We're reminding folks this is not some idealistic, futuristic thing. There are actually examples of how more living regenerative economies could survive, could be, right? Not only from our past, but currently there are other models of economy. And so we put together this very kind of general indigenous economies, knowing that, of course, we're not trying to romanticize anything, but in general, this is how some indigenous economies have worked. And of course, there are many, many tribes throughout the continent. We're not homogeneous, but in general, we've kind of formulated this framework to look something like this, right? Where we understand through an indigenous worldview, through a place-based knowledge systems, that Mother Earth's resources are renewing. They're gifts, right? These are things that, yes, we need to take, we need to use, but we understand them as gifts that we have to caretake for. And we are understanding the labor as a collective, as a cooperative, and in particularly through kinship, through our relationship to each other, whether that's our relationship in the family, whether that's our relationship by clan, whether that's a relationship by various tribes or various folks, understanding our relationship to each other and our responsibility to each other, for the purpose of a community survival, for this notion of 7 generations in the future, right? Always thinking about our relatives, our ancestors into the future and how they will survive. And again, brought together through this, a lot of our indigenous worldview is in our languages, right? How we relate to all of these 3 pieces is really steeped in language, is steeped in our oral histories, our cultural practices, and governance systems that look very different from tribe to tribe, but are in general communal responsibility, right? So that's in a very general view of what we call indigenous economies. And I'm going to pass it on over to, okay, how do we get to all this? Like, we know where we've been, we know where we are, right? We know where we want to get to. How do we get there? What are those strategies for getting there? And I'm going to pass it on over to Rochelle and Jessica.
See, I told you I'll sparkle. So as Ine said, we're going to talk about how we get there, because I think this is the part that we all get stuck in, right? We know that right now is not ideal for most of us. We know that we want to get to a place that seems like sci-fi right now. And how do we do that? And so Movement Generation has put together some of these strategies, and they're on here, and pardon the slide, it's a little bit messy, but we'll get you there. And these strategies are the steps that we take to get there. And I'm going to go over this generally, and then Rochelle is going to give some examples that are happening in Alaska. So the first thing, well, not the first thing, this is not a hierarchy, all of these things all at the same time, all the time. So the first thing I'm going to mention is stop the bad. And there's a number of things that we could all share about what the stop the bad is. That's a pretty easy one. But how do we stop the bad? One of the main things we do to stop the bad is to reclaim place-based knowledge, as Ine was just saying. And then through that reclamation of place-based knowledge, we get to build the new. And we get to build the new in whatever way we see fit by the principles that Kengo addressed earlier, right? If we have those groundings in mind with what Rochelle said about remembering forward, if we hold those principles true, then we are actually building the new. We have to change the rules. We have to change policies. We have to bring things down to the local level. We need to always be uplifting tribal sovereignty and Indigenous leaders at the local level that have that land-based knowledge. We need to have our municipal leaders making decisions at a local level. And we need the national and international to be less of a demand on what is happening in the rest of our communities. And of course, we have to play with the money, right? We don't talk about an economy without talking about money. So we have to divest from their power. And there's a number of ways we can do that. And we have to do it at every opportunity, whether it's with our money, if we have investments accounts, we have to do it in that way. And then we have to invest in things that build our power. And there's so many examples of this, and I'm super excited for us to hear from Rochelle. And then we're going to break out and talk together about how we do this. So Rochelle, on to you.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to give some examples here. So we'll start off with stopping the bad. An example of stopping the bad, I'll just give an example from my region. Hillcore and Doyon Corporation want to explore for oil and gas in the Yukon Flats, and particularly around the village that I'm from and the other villages in the flats, without the knowledge or consent of the local tribes or the shareholders. So this is the type of bad that we need to stop. An example, some things that we are doing to build the new, it's language revitalization, like Ine was talking about. It's local food production and reclaiming stories of hunting and fishing and those practices and using them to guide the rules and regulations. So let's change the story. We need visionary solutions that are locally led. We have a shared history of colonization and oppression. Let's heal together and let's name these systems of oppression and call them for what they are. How can we deepen democracy? We need climate action plans. We can get creative. Let's get connected to our legislators, and we can even do webinars now. So it's imperative that we recognize and respect tribal sovereignty and understand the difference between a corporation and a tribe. What are the roles of leadership and how do they fit together? So how do we divest in their power? We can stop subsidizing oil and gas and university divestment campaigns. How do we invest in our power? We need to fund and support education. So let's move towards sustainable energy and solarize. We have the technology, we have the need. So we need to also fund VPSOs and make sure that we have safe communities and everyone, you know, is, and there's equity in that, you know, and not just some communities have that. So, you know, a lot of it is based in equity, based in, you know, that fairness. Yeah, so here, those are some examples. And I'm gonna hand it back over to Jessica and we're gonna do a exercise.
Thanks, Rochelle. So we have these ways to do this. We have the regenerative and the extractive economy. If you can hit the next slide. And while we do that, I just want to give props to our amazing tech person, Ryan, who's holding this all together for us. So just a second to like snap at him or wave your hands or whatever you do. He's really holding it down for all of us to be smooth. And he's going to get really tested right now because we're going to break up into groups of 10-ish. And we have some facilitators that he's going to align us with. So that might take a minute. But while we get that sorted, we have this whole strategy framework for y'all to look at here. So we talked about this part on the left, which is extractive economy. We talked about the right, which is living economy. Those are not binaries. Those exist together right now. There's real bad stuff happening, but there's real great stuff happening too, as Rochelle just mentioned. And then in the middle here, we have the solutions that are both oppositional and visionary. So we're stopping the bad while we build the new. And we're divesting from their power and investing in our power through the set of values that Kengo went through while we're deepening our democracy. So this is the whole shebang right here. No big deal. We're just gonna do this forever and it's gonna be great. No pressure, but we're just going to take a minute, take all this in, check out this slide, and Ryan is going to get us sorted into working groups or into, sorry, FCAC, the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition has working groups. So that's, anyway, I digress. He is going to set us out into groups and we will all have a facilitator. Facilitators know who they are. And the questions we're going to be checking in on are really focused around just transition. And what are some examples that you have seen around just transition? And if you're in Alaska, please stay Alaska focused. If you're not in Alaska, please share what you've seen in your communities. And then also, how do you go about identifying if this is just transition project or campaign? And really, when we're asking that question, we're really thinking about the principles that that Kengo walked us through. Like, how do we actually know that this is the right way forward in this, that we're doing this in a good way? So on that note, Ryan, do your magic. Thank you.
Oops. Maybe I brought us back a little early. Did I bring us back early, Ryan? I thought it said it was up.
Yeah, we extended to 12:45 since
Oh,
there was
great.
a little bit of
Well, we'll
tech
take up this room.
issues.
All right, good. I unmuted you there. Oh,
Nice. People are probably having good discussion, so it'll probably take even longer.
it may. Yeah. It may.
I always get put into like quieter breakout rooms, which is nice. But also then I'm like, God, do I talk? But I also like holding silence.
Hey, it could be powerful. Let me look at some of the notes and maybe start some of our own conversation here with some other groups are talking about. Oh, so how about some like more food related just transition projects? We've talked a bit about more of the root cause sort of oriented. And do folks know of any sort of food sovereignty or food justice oriented projects in Alaska?
I don't know. Were you there when we met Bernie Carl at China? Well, he's like, I mean, he's kind of crazy, but he was like starting this. Okay, so in Dutch Harbor, they're planning to build like a geothermal pipeline, like they have in like Greenland and Iceland, to like have a geothermal source. And he wants to like have a whole like farm out there. And I think it would be a good thing because they're closing down the marine highway, but at the same time building like a 26-mile like geothermal pipeline underneath the Bering Sea is like, that seems kind of complicated to try to route into just transition.
Truth.
And I'm gonna mute myself.
Your faces are so beautiful. I just want to hug and snuggle you, even if I don't know you. That's weird. With consent.
Just a little late.
Yay, we made it back. That was great. That was great. Is everybody back?
We're close. We're missing about 20 people, but they're rolling back in.
That was like I don't know if people have watched Harry Potter, but I just felt like I just acted. Anyway, Harry Potter jokes.
Actually, Ine, question. Ryan's asking if we should share the screen again. And I'm just wondering, do you need any of those slides, or can you look at them yourselves? Because it feels great to me to be seeing everybody.
I don't think I need the slide.
Great. Let's just skip the slides, Ryan. Thanks.
I'm glad some people are getting my Harry Potter jokes. Matt. We got to be putting on our magic caps.
Thanks for creating the port key, Ryan. I'm just going to keep it going while we're waiting for folks. We're still at 92, Ine, so I'm going to say that maybe we lost some folks in the transition. So maybe we should just go ahead and get to it.
Yeah, I think some folks got scared of breakout sessions. So what are we doing now, Jess? We went to, I'm trying to look at my notes here.
Well,
We're closing up. We're giving some, no.
doing some Q&A, maybe some share back in the chat, and then we'll share about some next steps.
Yeah. Yeah, so do we have some, thank you all for going into those breakout sessions, and I hope the conversations were fruitful. We hope you got to meet some new folks in the state, and we're gonna look for some questions now. So we're gonna do some Q&A and talk about some of our additional resources and tell you about upcoming things. So somebody's supposed to hand me questions.
Well, I guess we'll ask, do people have questions? You can put them in the chat, and we will try to just have a little bit of dialogue before we close out. And thanks for learning with us as we learn this new platform.
So where do we go from here?
Just
Great question. So this was the first of a series of webinars. For those of you who were able to come to the Alaska Just Transition Summit that we had in January, it's so good to see some of your faces here. But you will know that we ended with some exciting energy to move into regional convenings and really have dialogues on the regional level of what just transition means for us locally or regionally. And of course, we can't do that right now. So we've moved into this digital platform, which is still pretty exciting. And this webinar was really intended to kind of get us back grounded in that understanding of what just transition is and the shared framework. And the next step will be a number of other webinars. And we want to really go deeper into some of these discussions, whether it be deeper into the different strategies of moving towards a regenerative economies, whether it be financing the just transition, what do community funding initiatives look like? And I saw on our call we had Peter Hilly on our call, who is with MACID, who's another really great organization that's out of the Appalachia area that's been really utilizing community funding initiatives in a dynamic way to shift employment sources and economies and away from a coal into regenerative. So I'm sure we'll probably get to hear from him later on in some of these other webinars. We will be going into the next webinar series, which will be around a just recovery, and really looking at what in times of crisis, in emergency, maybe disaster situations, how do we build paths of justice and equity through those times? So that will be something coming up. We've got, check out our website. So all of our groups that are hosting this webinar, and you could see them on the slide at the beginning, was Native Peoples Action Community Fund, the Alaska Center, the ACPERG, and Native Movement, and Fireweed Collective. We should just put that slide up of everybody's logos, because I'm forgetting people. And all of our organizations have put together this website, the Just Transition website, Just Transition AK. So www, I think someone posted it in the chat, justtransitionak.org is a website you can go to see the upcoming web series. We also have an amazing resources page on the website where you can see resources from a number of the organizations that we mentioned earlier. Indigenous Environmental Network, Movement Generation, probably something from MACID. Lots of really great resources to delve deeper into what just transition means in other places or to other organizing work. And you can also register for our upcoming webinar series from the website. We have a Facebook page, an Instagram page. So those are some of the upcoming things that what do we do next, right? We want to keep the dialogue going. Ooh, we're also going to have a really great coloring book coming out. So stay tuned for that, because you know, we are in this moment of transition and change right now. And I hope that folks take some time to just sit and work through our workbook when we get it out to y'all, because the workbook will have prompts for you to journal or color or draw and really think about what change feels like right now. We've been advocating for change for so long, change out of systems that have been oppressive and abusive. And we're in a huge shift right now. So what does it feel like? And how do we ensure that our steps forward through these times of change are steeped in justice and equity? How do we ensure that while we're building on uncertain times and we don't have a roadmap maybe, that we're still shaping the path forward with hands of justice and equity, right? So those are just some things to maybe ponder in our time and in shelter in place at the moment, and look for more resources. Jess?
Yeah, I want to ask Eve if you're still on the line. There's something that's happening right after this to begin celebrating Earth Day, which we should do every day with gratitude for all of her gifts. But Eve, you want to share a bit about what y'all are up to with Aya?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, it's really exciting. From 2 to 4 today, Alaska Youth for Environmental Action is hosting kind of a Earth Day climate strike, virtually, obviously, on Zoom. And it's going to be a really great time for everyone to come together and learn more about how to take action and the actions that are currently being taken right now. Multiple youth leaders from across the state are going to be talking about like the importance of community, individual changes versus systemic changes, and different issues like global climate policy, and things like that. It's going to be a really great place to see all of the youth from across the state really come together and show their power and leadership. And we invite anyone who's interested to watch or to join the Zoom. You can register for the event on, I believe, the Alaska Center Facebook, website, Instagram, as well as any other AYA channels. So please come and join and learn more about what amazing youth are doing across the state. I look forward to seeing everybody there.
Thanks, Eve, and everyone in AYA, to however y'all are celebrating Earth Day through radical activism and caring with the earth, getting your hands in the dirt, all the ways that you can support Go for a Walk. I'm going to pass it on to Brandon, who doesn't know I'm doing this, thanks, to share maybe about where this is recorded and how we can be sharing it out to our communities if folks want to be sharing this out and getting more people involved.
Awesome. Sure. So we have recorded this webinar. We meant to ask you all beforehand. So if anyone is uncomfortable with being recorded, please let us know. You can email info@justtransitionak.org. But we will share this out. So we have a video here that we will share it on the email list. And we are still adjusting some of that email list. If you're not receiving emails from us, again, email us directly so I can make sure you get those. And we will also through email offer the way to register for the next webinar.
Thank you. And can you put out our email in the chat, Brandon, before we
Sure thing.
get out of here? Thank you. And so we're about to close out, and sometimes we close out our meetings. Ine has been leading us in a meditation. And so that is practiced in a number of ways, but possibly just right now, as we all have about a minute until it's 1 o'clock and maybe you're jumping to a next Zoom call or a rally or whatever you're doing, maybe just take a minute. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes and putting your feet on the ground, and just sharing gratitude that we got to take time for ourselves today together, that we're building this movement together that is going to have to change everything, and we're going to have to do it in a good way. So we'll close with a minute of meditation, and please feel free to sign off when you've done that. And thank you so much for being here with us today and trusting us with some of your time. Remember to wash your hands, remember to hydrate, remember to smash the patriarchy, and take care of yourselves. Enjoy the sleigh.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.